And so introducing guys, we have met Brian Murphy before and a couple other things that he's come and helped us with at Cabrillo High School. And I was very excited to hear that he was going to be giving a technical presentation for us this year. And so this is Mr. Brian Murphy of Edwards Lifesciences. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Ken, for the introduction. Very happy to be here. Before I kick this off, I want to, most of this presentation, I'm just going to shoot through it, give a lot of my background. I'll go through kind of what the overview is going to be. But once we get to, we're going to be doing a problem together, and I'd like to get feedback from you guys in real time, if that's possible. If not, we'll just go through it, and I'll just walk through all the steps and then open everything up to questions at the end. But hopefully we can get some interaction. If not, then we'll just go through it line by line. But all right, so today I'm giving a talk on mechanical engineering in the medical device industry. My name is Brian Murphy, and let's get into this. Before I go through the overview, just like a really brief disclosure, I'm not representing Edwards Lifesciences through this call. I'm just an employee there and presenting some public knowledge distilled into a format for educational purposes. So overview on kind of where we're going today. My background is where we're going to start. Then I'm going to give an overview of what biomedical engineering is and mechanical engineering. I feel like there are certain understandings that may be in very narrow views of what both of those things are. In fact, they're very, very broad. So I'll take a look at that with you all. And then I'll talk about Edwards Lifesciences, what it is, who we are, what we're working on. And then briefly, I'll go over my day-to-day work, just kind of a list out of what it is that an engineer does in my shoes. And then we'll move on to that applied mathematics problem that I was referencing before. So first of all, I started at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in 2010. I started off as a general engineer. A general engineer is basically someone that, in the context of academia, doesn't have an interest that fits one thing in particular, and instead they go and talk to their advisor and they come up with a plan on some cohesive set of classes that will eventually allow that student to be able to do what it is that they want to do. It might not fit a mold, but at least Cal Poly and several other schools do allow for you to be able to form your own degree. During that process, though, I realized that I did want to go down the medical device path. I did want to be a biomedical engineer, and my intention was to improve quality of life for those around me and leave the world better than I found it. Through an internship, I learned that actually, instead of being a biomedical engineer, I'd be most effective still in the medical device industry being a mechanical engineer. And there are some connotations of biomedical engineer that some people think sets you aside from those that are mechanical engineers. Others see it as a very positive thing. Some see it as somewhat of a negative thing. I'll go through kind of that in subsequent slides. But after I did the mechanical engineering bachelor's degree, I went on to get a biomedical engineering degree because that's ultimately what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn physiology. I wanted to understand anatomy a little bit better and be able to use that skill set combined with the mechanical engineering skill set in order to produce the best possible products and have the best impact before I'm done here. So looking at my work experience, I had an internship after my freshman year, which is kind of rare, and I just took what I could get. And I took a position in a petroleum engineering role where I didn't have a lot of technical knowledge at the time. You'd think that going through physics and calculus and chemistry and biology that you'd really have a firm foundation in the technical aspects of how to be an engineer, but not really. That's sort of the building blocks for it. So in this role, I really did some project management stuff, some office work, just a lot of non-technical things that were a great experience, showed me how to work in an office environment, but wasn't exactly what I was looking for, and seeing what the work of those around me was, I knew that it wasn't for me. So I took on my next internship at a prosthetic and orthotic clinic. So for those that don't know, prosthetics are full replacement of limbs. Orthotics are some support for existing limbs. So for example, you could think of like a shoe insert, the sole that keeps your arch up as an orthotic, but then that expands into a whole bunch of other things, including scoliosis, back braces, something that supports your foot if it's tilted to the side a little bit. It's just full on braces. And that taught me a lot of things. One of them being hand skills. I spent a lot of time in a workshop and learned how to take what was being molded off of a patient directly and turn it into a medical device that that patient could use in the next couple of days. Great experience. However, I realized that through that, I felt as though I was not going to be making the impact that I wanted to make. I wanted to have more global reach. And even though it is satisfying to help patients directly, it wasn't exactly what I wanted for myself. I wanted to be able to build the things that these hands-on folks were using in their day-to-day work. Then that brought me to going into the medical device industry as an engineer. My first internship was at St. Jude Medical, not to be confused with the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. They're two distinct companies that have nothing to do with each other. But there they work on, among a lot of things, pacemakers and implantable cardiac defibrillators. And that was my next internship and my next co-op, where I learned a lot of test method development, really deep into understanding how these devices work. Though I didn't contribute to the design in those internships, rarely do you in internships. And the subsequent co-op had the same story, didn't really contribute to design, but learned what it meant to be an engineer. And a co-op really is just a 6-month-long internship where you take off time from school. And for anyone planning to go into engineering or any profession that might offer something like that, I would highly recommend it, even though it sounds like, oh man, I don't want to be in school longer than necessary. If you have a co-op before you go into the workforce, it's much easier to get a job and you're much better prepared. And for me, it actually indicated to me that I wanted to pivot from biomedical engineering to mechanical engineering because I felt I could be much more effective as a mechanical engineer. And so when I went back to school, I switched majors and then again, went back to biomedical engineering eventually later, but developed a very strong technical skill set through mechanical engineering. And lastly, that brought me to a co-op at Edwards and my full-time job at Edwards, which I will get into much more deeply in a few minutes here. So what is biomedical engineering? I said that I realized that I didn't want to do that straight out of the gate, and I switched to mechanical instead. Why did I do that? Because biomedical engineering has a very generic connotation to it. It's that you are someone that dabbles in a whole bunch of different things, but doesn't have any real focus. And by this image up here, which has a lot on it, a lot to read, I'm not going to go through everything, but as you can see, that outer ring, you can be a biomedical engineer in all of those different areas. So you can be an electrical engineer and be a biomedical engineer. You can work in chemistry and biochemistry and still be a biomedical engineer. And the term is, in some places, some universities, interchangeable with the term bioengineering. A lot of the times bioengineering has a more chemical focus and a more biochemistry focus, but they're interchangeable. It's somewhat confusing. And if you're trying to brand yourself, it can be a little bit difficult if you're trying to say that you're a biomedical engineer, but you can do CAD modeling, because that's not always what biomedical engineering is doing. So these different areas that I circled on here: biomaterials development, implant development, biotechnology, biofuels, robotics, signal and image processing, are those that I tend to see as more common when you're going to a university. Some of the skill sets you walk away with are in one of these. Not usually all of these. You might be exposed to some of these different areas of biomedical engineering, but you really have to pick one to go into. But when you decide to be a biomedical engineer, you have all of these options available to you. You can do so many different things. You can take a bunch of different classes, understand what it is that you want to do, and then specialize. So that's really cool. And in the same way, general engineering is the same way, but it is much, much, much more broad, as you can imagine. So talked about biomedical engineering. What's mechanical engineering? Mechanical engineering, you might think of some of the more traditional career choices, such as automotive engineer, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, working at a power plant, working in the aerospace industry. A lot of the times you'll find that a university will offer specific aerospace or aeronautical engineering programs, but per the definition of mechanical engineering, aerospace fits under that. It's just a specialization. And in the same way, marine engineering and medical device or biomedical engineering can be a subcategory of mechanical engineering. It's a very, very broad category. But it too allows you to do pretty much whatever you want. And it doesn't limit you to these traditional career pathways that might not sound all that incredibly interesting, but it does open the door for you to do a lot. If you get a degree as a mechanical engineer, you can be accepted to a number of different programs for you're getting a master's or a PhD, because you've proven that you have this logical train of thought that is very valuable, that is difficult to teach and difficult to find through many other degrees. So for example, up here we have patent attorney. That's something that is a very interesting pivot from mechanical engineering. Not a ton of people do it, but a good number of people do go down that route. And it is someone that knows the technical aspects of a design. And when it's handed to them by an inventor, they take it, they try to figure out any other way that that design could be helpful to solve a need, and other ways to solve the need that that device is trying to solve. And they put together a long list of all of these different embodiments, they call it, different versions of this thing that allow for the inventor to be protected. And it involves a lot of creativity, a lot of technical know-how. It's a really cool area of focus. It's something that I haven't ruled out for myself eventually, but it's a very, very interesting area to go into. Similarly, a non-traditional route might be sales engineer. You can be good with people. You can enjoy the physics of things, but not like working in CAD every day. And being a sales engineer is someone that is a very technical person that either works alongside another salesperson or is the primary person to teach what is to teach their customers exactly how to use a particular product for a specific application. And then some of the other ones are listed here. We can talk more about that. If anyone has questions on what these other areas might be, I can get into that at the end of this. So hopping over to what I do and what Edwards Lifesciences does. Why do we care about hearts? It might seem to be a very non-important question. Like, of course, we care about hearts, but hearts are really what keep us going. You can lose your sight, you can lose a limb, a lot of things can happen to you, and you can keep moving on, you can keep doing things, you can spend time with your family. But if you don't have a heart, you're not going to get very far. So what Edwards really takes to heart is doing what we can to try to help individuals that are having issues with their heart. So in the context of where our economy is, where our population growth is, if you take the American adult population, around 48% of people have some form of heart disease. And I'll get into that in a minute. What does heart disease mean? But basically just problems with your heart. That's a lot of people. And in the next 3 decades or so, we're basically at the intersection on this graph between red and blue of those that are very young and those that are 65 and older, where we will have the older population outweighing the younger population by a significant amount. That's never happened in the history of this country, but we are getting to a point where the global population is going to outweigh the global population of adults over 65 is going to outweigh children by a significant amount and effectively triple in the next 30 years. So if you take half of adults right now that have a problem now, that issue is going to become significantly exacerbated. Like, you're going to have so many more people that have issues with their hearts that aren't able to do what they want to do with their children, with their grandchildren. And we need to do what we can now to prepare for that, and do what we can now to also help those that are around us today. So a lot of you might have been on for Amy Fisher's presentation about a month ago. So I am just going to give a very brief summary of what she did, and just give you a starting point for those that were not able to attend that session. So Edwards Lifesciences was founded by two people, Miles Lowell Edwards and Dr. Albert Starr. Edwards was an engineer who developed fuel pumps for military aircrafts. As a child, he had rheumatic fever, which led to heart complications. Because it was a very personal issue for him, he took an interest in healing the heart. And because of his background, his knowledge of pumps, and the heart is, in simplified terms, just a pump, he thought that he would do what he could to create the first artificial heart, which would mean if your heart is failing, pulling that out, putting in this pump system that's electrically controlled, it's got motors in it, it is a very complex concept. So he brought this to a doctor, Dr. Starr, in 1959 to ask him, what do you think about this? Dr. Starr said, why don't we start a little bit more simply? Let's start with just the valve. So as you can see over on the right-hand side of the screen, the Starr-Edwards valve is what they developed together. It's a simple design. It's a ball in a cage. And the way that it functions is that from one side of the heart, you have blood push forward, which pushes the ball out of the way. And then you want the blood to continue down this path and not backflow. So when one part of the heart pumps, the blood goes through. And then when the other side pumps, it doesn't go back through that hole. The ball blocks it, and then the blood shoots over into the vessel that it's intended to go into. And they were able to develop this first valve in 1960. And it is very durable, very long lasting. However, you need to have blood thinners for the rest of your life in order to use this, because it has constant interactions between metal and this ball. The blood is getting crushed and starting a response that would lead to blood clotting. So you need to have blood thinners for the rest of your life, though your life will be extended significantly. A lot of patients, not a lot, but patients have lived beyond 50 years with this valve in their body, which is pretty incredible that technology developed 50 years ago is still working today. So now let's get into a little bit more of the modern history. Edwards first launched a porcine valve, which was the valve taken from a pig, cut out, and put into this frame, and was surgically implanted. The significance of this was that you don't have these mechanical interactions, so you're not having to take blood thinners, which was an incredible improvement. However, it was understood after 7 to 12 years that these valves don't have the longevity that the mechanical valve does or that the human valve does, because pigs only live for 7 to 12 years. So two, the valves tend to only last about that long. So they pivoted instead to look at cutting leaflets out of other cardiac tissue from other animals. So they found a cow. They took the tissue from the outside of the cow's heart. They stamped it into these leaflets, and they matched them together based on thickness and size. And they sewed them together into this valve that you see over on the right-hand side. And that has significantly longer longevity. It is going for, I believe, about 30 years for this style of valve. And they have even stopped producing the mechanical valves and the porcine valves in 2007 and 2014, respectively. So now that's a history of what Edwards was and currently is. Now let's talk about the structural heart side of Edwards. There is also the patient monitoring group, which Amy Fisher talked to you about, and I won't address that at all. She has a great presentation that's up online if you did miss it. Just look up Amy Fisher, Cabrillo, Edwards, and it'll pop up for you, or go through the Cabrillo YouTube channel to go find it. But specifically on the structural heart side of Edwards Lifesciences, we have surgical structural heart, which I just addressed pretty much up until now. There's a couple minor tweaks, but that's the gist of it. And then the transcatheter heart valves, which Amy talked about a little bit before in her presentation. That's basically a valve that is able to be cinched down to a very, very small diameter, put into a tube that we call a catheter, and it goes up through the femoral artery and is dropped into place to replace the aortic valve when that starts to calcify. So both of those technologies, the top two, are full replacements of existing valves. Now, transcatheter, mitral, and tricuspid therapies is the division that I work for. And instead of being as invasive and fundamentally transformative of how the heart looks and works and lasts over time, we want to do as little trauma to the heart as possible. So for surgical, obviously you are going through a tremendous amount of surgical procedures, a lot of recovery time. Transcatheter heart valves are significant replacements, but they can, and they're very effective, but they only are currently commercial for going into certain valves. With this new business unit, we're able to go in and fix valves that are already there without taking them out or fully replacing them. There are technologies that are being worked on to fully replace them, but it's a very interesting endeavor to go down fixing something instead of fully replacing it. And I'll talk about that more in subsequent slides. So to just give you a basic understanding of what heart disease is, don't focus on any of the real details here. It's just that the point here is that heart disease can take on a number of different forms. And the one that we're going to be talking about is related to valve disease. That's primarily what Edwards focuses on. But there are a number of different things and so many different companies and technologies and procedures that address all of these different issues. But today, and for Edwards, we're just going to focus on valve disease. So what is the specific valve disease? And there are 4 different valves in the heart. They can have a bunch of different issues. I'm just bringing us into the point of understanding what this technology is that I'm going to talk about and why it's important. So this is a cross-section of the mitral valve. It's supported by those tethers down at the bottom that hold on to the papillary muscle. And when the heart contracts, it pushes blood up and shouldn't go back through that valve. And it shoots off over to the side through another valve. This, when the top of the heart contracts, the atria, blood is squeezed down through the valve and the leaflets pop out of the way. However, when the leaflets pop out of the way, blood goes down, and again, the cycle continues, and blood pushes up from the bottom, and it closes. Sometimes you'll have an issue known as annular dilation, where the annulus, just the valve, gets bigger. But the leaflets, those little pieces of the valve that close off to allow blood, to prevent blood from backflowing, they don't get any bigger, or they don't get much bigger. And when the blood is being now pinched from the ventricle in the bottom to push the blood to the next path, it backflows and it goes up into the atria, and you're not getting the proper flow of blood through the heart. So it's supposed to pinch down, go into the bottom, and then go to the side. When you have annular dilation and consequently mitral regurgitation, meaning that you regurgitate from the mitral valve, the blood will go over to the next path and back up into the atria. So what we want to do is fix that valve and reduce the annulus size. So there has been a procedure that's been around for about 50 years. In the 1970s, annuloplasty was first developed, which required a full sternotomy, just like you see on TV. You might have a family member or a friend that has had to undergo this procedure where they cut open your entire chest, break the ribs, go in, cut open the heart, and go through the effort of cutting down a portion of the valve, bringing it together, sewing it up, bringing this ring into place where you take a suture, you go into the annulus, into the ring, into the annulus, into the ring, into the annulus, into the ring, until you go around sometimes the entire valve, sometimes a portion of the valve. Here is shown as a portion of the valve. And then you grab onto the suture, push the ring down, it sucks the annulus down to the right size. And this solves the problem. Now your annulus is the size it's intended to be so that the leaflets are able to connect again and you're not getting any backflow through the valve. This, unfortunately, though, even though it fixes your issue of not having blood getting to where it needs to go, your lethargy, how tired you are, your lightheadedness, your dizziness, your difficulty going upstairs, it fixes all of those things, but the recovery is pretty extensive. You have to stay in the hospital for 5 to 7 days, and it's a multi-month recovery process because there's a lot of trauma. You have to wait for everything to heal back to the way it was, and a lot of your activities are restricted. So you lose out on months of your life because you're just waiting to recover. So what is the solution to that? One proposed solution that has really sped up the process of recovery is through what many of you might have seen on YouTube. There's a robotic surgery technique. One of the most common systems is called davinci. I'd encourage you to look that up. It's very, very cool. But basically, the incisions that you see over on the right are the only incisions that you have to make. So it's a couple on the top, a couple on the side, and you have this physician that's inside of this little booth with these little joysticks and all these controls, and they're able to very precisely move these robotic arms around into these tight cavities to cut open the heart, put the ring in place, sew it up, close you up, and there's a lot less trauma. You're not cracking the chest open anymore, but you're still cutting down the heart. And because of that, there's still a recovery time associated with it, though it is a significant improvement compared to the last slide we looked at. Much shorter hospital stay, about half, a lot less bleeding, much less risk of infection, but it's still a traumatic surgery that requires you cutting open the heart. You can get back to your activities much faster, but still not the same day. Now let's take a look at the project that I've been working on. It's a product that is not available in all regions, very few actually, but it's very exciting technology that we're working on bringing to more and more patients every day. And I'm going to talk through here really quick, kind of the high level mechanics of it, and then we'll watch a couple videos on it. So you have what you see in the picture on the left-hand side, this multi-handle delivery system with all of these catheters, and you've got these knobs and handles that you move and turn. And the whole point of that is to be able to get this ring into the proper position so that you can drop anchors in, plant it down, and pinch the annulus to be the proper size or the original size that it was. So let's take a look at first the delivery system. So the delivery system brings the implant, which just came out of the catheter, to the right location. So now that it's in place, let's put it down on the annulus. So we have anchors, these spiraled little screws that come in, drop down all the way around. But we have 3 in the first segment, 1 in each of the following segments. And there you go. You've got your implant in place. But the annulus is still the original, the size that it was with your disease. So how does that help? Well, we come in after we navigate to the part where we want it to be, we drop in the anchors, we come in with another device, the size adjustment tool, and we connect up to the implant. That's a little pulley, and there's a wire that runs to the implant. And now we're pulling that wire into the pulley, and that contracts the annulus. And you can adjust it based off of what you're seeing on the echocardiography to decide exactly how big you want it to be. You don't want it to be too tight. You don't want it to have any backflow either. So there's a balance there, and it's up to the physician and the team there to decide exactly how big you want the annulus to be. So that's what I work on day to day. I've been working on this project for about 2 years, and actually I used to work in critical care before that, but I've been here for 2 years and we're making progress every day. It's a really cool, exciting platform to work on. So what do I do day to day? I work on design. I work on SolidWorks. I develop models for fixtures, devices, new concepts. It's something that I enjoy doing now that I know how to use the software. I really do enjoy doing it. I also work on writing patents for some new technologies that are in the works. Also, I work on testing, specification development, deciding what is a good performance metric and what is not. And then we test the final design to those performance metrics to make sure that over the long term, this is going to perform as we expect it to. I also help to coordinate some of the biocompatibility testing, making sure that the materials that we're selecting are not going to have any adverse reactions to the patient once they're implanted or even during the procedure. We can't have something that's, we'd prefer not to have something that's made of nickel or latex or something that could rust, because that is something that is touching the patient, and you don't want to put anything into the patient other than just the implant. And you don't want them to have an allergic reaction to anything that you are putting in contact with them. Additionally, there's ongoing product performance. I also have done some project management activities, coordinating internationally between Edwards employees and vendors in order to make sure that designs are being created as expected, and that any ongoing maintenance of the devices, if certain stock material has to be swapped out, making assessments to understand if this is going to actually perform the same way as it did when we first designed it, or if there's going to be a change. And if there's going to be a change, we really need to do what we can to backtrack that and make it so that there is no change. Because once you get something approved by regulatory bodies like the FDA, it can't change. It's very, very difficult to pass something through that is a change to the original design, because there's so much testing, clinical evidence that this works as you originally designed it. You don't want to change it and now have to go through all of that again. And also, I've been more recently interacting with physicians, evaluating their feedback on performance of the device, observing the products in use, and getting insights from them on what to develop next. So that's Edwards, that's Cardioband, and this is one skill set that I picked up in school that is a direct application of mathematics. It's simple, and I hope that the way that I presented it here makes sense, but this is the portion where I'd like you guys to be more interactive if you can be. And I don't know if there's a put up your hand option, but if you say something, let's engage. So I'll set up the problem statement. Over on the left-hand side, you have a little cavity. And on the right-hand side, you have 2 cylinders of different sizes. These cylinders consistently need to be able to fit inside of that cavity. What do I mean by consistently? If you are going to be making thousands of those little cylinders and thousands of those blocks, it's going to be absolutely impossible to make them exactly the same size every time. So you have to have an allowable difference between the sizes of all of those parts, what we call a tolerance. You tolerate changes in the design within a certain margin. So for example here, we're going to talk about the little disc as having a tolerance of plus or minus 1 millimeter. For practical reasons here, we can talk about it in terms of inches. It doesn't really matter. It's 30 plus or minus 1. So it can go down to 29, it can go up to 31. The bottom one has a tolerance of 2 on a nominal or average size of 60. So plus or minus 2 on that would be 58 to 62. This image over on the right-hand side shows the blocks mismatched, so that you would have the smallest little block, potentially, with the biggest large block, and vice versa, where On the left, that total height would add up to 91. On the right, it would add up to 89. And the cavity on the left-hand side is I believe it was 90 millimeters, with a tolerance of plus or minus, plus or minus 1.5. So that would mean that you go up to 91.5 or down to 88.5. So hopefully the problem statement makes sense here. So let's take a look at, this is a cross section of it. This is the same block, just side profile, so it's easier to notice the height differences. And it's not to scale. That 30 millimeter block is probably could fit into that red block about 4 times, but this is what we have. So this is what we're going to work with. So taking a look at what those tolerances are, you have the height of the red puck, and those are inverted, fantastic. The height of the yellow puck is 30 plus or minus 1. The height of the red puck is 60 plus or minus 2. The height of the opening is 94.5 plus or minus 1.5. So I got the height wrong on that one. It's 94.5, not 90. So it moves from 96 down to 93. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's start going through the math of it. In some instances, you might get both of those blocks being large. So are they going to fit? And there's a possibility of both of them being small. How small are they going to be? What's that biggest gap going to be? So what would be the average difference or the average gap size for this? So looking at the nominal, we have 30, 60, and 94.5. This is the cavity, and these are the sizes of the blocks for the cylinders. Does anybody have an answer for me on what that gap would be on average, not including the tolerances? Okay, no problem. So basically what you do is you look at 30 and 60, that together is 90, and you have a gap or a total size of the cavity at 94.5. So if you subtract 94.5 and 90, you get 4.5. So that makes sense that that is the gap down here, that in the average scenario, you have a sufficiently large gap where there's not going to be an interference, meaning that they will both fit in there. And that's going to be what the gap size is. So now let's take a look at what is going to be the largest gap that we might see. So the largest gap that we would see takes into account the tolerances. So we would take a look at the smallest version of these little pucks and the largest version of the opening. So the opening would be 94.5 plus 1.5, so 96. And then we have 90 cumulatively for the pucks, minus 3 cumulatively for the pucks, which would give you 87. So 96 minus 87 gives you 9 as the largest potential gap. So now let's take a look at the smallest gap. In the same way, you are going to look at the extremes of these parts. However, we're going to look at the smallest possible version of the opening and the largest possible version of the pucks. So the pucks are 93 millimeters at the highest end. And in exactly the same way, the cavity is 93 at the lower end, because 94.5 minus 1.5, 93, 30 plus 60, 90 minus plus 3 is 93. So you would have a gap of 0, meaning that this fits perfectly line to line inside of there. So in the worst case scenario, you would have a gap of 0 where it's barely fitting, but you designed it just right so that it does fit. And in the best case scenario, you have a lot of wiggle in there. So you might pick a tolerance because you don't want to have so much wiggle, but you want to make sure it always fits. So you might decrease your tolerances here and there. You could tighten up on the red puck. You could tighten up on the yellow puck. There's a lot of factors that weigh into that, but that's one engineering concept that you can take the math that you're learning today and apply it to your future career as an engineer if that's something that you choose to do. So this, as you can imagine, can be expanded significantly to huge projects. You think about just like a bridge that spans over a river. You have so many different connecting pieces and so many little bolts that go into each little spot. They have to be able to compensate for the tolerances in that bridge and machine these parts, or however you're going to fabricate these parts, in such a way that they will consistently fit together into this huge structure and not be too short and not be too long. You want to make sure that bridge makes it all the way, but you also want to make sure that that bridge is not going to go way too far past the river, unnecessarily so, and waste a lot of material and time putting that in. So just a concept that maybe you'll look at things a little bit differently now that you kind of understand that these little pieces will eventually add up, and when you're designing things, they have to be taken into account. So going full circle, this is the last slide here. I'm just going to take a very brief example here using tolerance stack up in the context of designing the cardioband system. So for a catheter, which was again that just tube that gets inserted up into the patient that helps you bring the implant to where it needs to go, needs to be able to bend. And how does it bend? You have these pull wires that are inside of these grooves on the sides of the catheter. And I'll show a cross section in a moment to illustrate that exactly. But basically, when you pull on one, it tightens up. And if you're pulling on the one on the left, the green representation of the catheter shows how it's going to bend. And also, if you were to pull on the red, it would do the same thing. What's happening here? You have these wires that run up and down through the catheter. You pull on one, it bends, you relax it, it goes back to straight. Again, it bends, goes back to straight. What does this have anything to do with tolerance stack-ups? You've got these little cavities all the way around the outside that these wires have to go through. These wires are a certain size. Those cavities are a certain size. These are very small cavities and wires. And these wires not only just sit in there directly, sometimes they're encapsulated in a polymer, some plastic. In this case, in this example that I pulled off the internet, Teflon. That's what's used in there. And you need to be able to have a tolerance on the wire, a tolerance on the Teflon, and a tolerance on that cavity that it's going to ride through. Otherwise, when you try to pull on it, there's going to be a lot of friction and you're not going to be able to bend it. Or it's going to take so much effort to bend it that you're going to break the pull wire. So these little differences between parts can have tremendous impacts on this catheter or many other things that are designed. So with that, I'm open to any questions that you might have. We can go back to any of the slides before. We can talk about anything I talked about, maybe things I didn't talk about. Up to you.
Very interesting, Mr. Murphy. Thank you so very much for that presentation. We do have a couple questions. One of them is from Serena Arzate. She said, are the valves still made from the same material as before, or have they improved?
They have changed. So originally we had mechanical, then we went over to the pig valve tissue, and then we moved to the cow valve tissue. And more recently, the valve tissue has been sourced from the same place. We're still using cow tissue in modern valves, but they're just chemically treated differently for a number of reasons, including preventing calcium deposits from landing on it and stiffening the valve and rendering it basically useless, because like the valve needs to flex and bend, but if it's too stiff, it's not going to bend and it's going to become useless. So there have been incremental adjustments over time. That's the most recent one.
Okay. And then Adrian Bayadas says, when they replace an internal organ piece like a heart valve, is that considered to be prosthetic or artificial?
Both, actually. So a prosthetic would be anything that replaces an existing structure. And because we're using non-biologic material, something that's not directly taken from another human and transplanted in, it would be considered predominantly artificial, though the tissue before it's treated was biologic. So there's kind of a gray line there, but everything that holds it, there's a fabric on it, there's a metal frame, there's some other polymers in there. Those are artificial. So I would say it's kind of along that path of being considered mostly artificial, but there are some biological elements to it.
There's a lot of questions coming in. Hold on. I got to catch up. What material, Kylie Yang is asking, what material is the cardio band made of?
So it's it's very similar to like there's a lot of materials that go into it. So we have the band, which you could kind of consider like a sock, and that's made out of a fabric that is pretty similar to what your clothing's made out of. Not cotton, but polyester. And it's not exactly polyester, but it's something similar to it, where it's a synthetic fabric that is woven in a very specific way to meet our needs. There's also some metal integrated into it, where you have that cinch wire that's clamped on to one portion of the band, and then the other end goes up into also the metallic spool. And those are stainless steel.
And guys, before we get too far, we actually have 2 surveys for you to complete. And so both of them are fairly brief, but as we're doing the questions, I thought I'd give some of you the opportunity to already do them. One is for Mr. Murphy. And so his is a Survey Monkey that I am posting right now. If you guys can please take the time to do that survey before you log off. I know we're coming up here on 4 o'clock here. It's 3:50. I will be posting one for CED also, if you can please take that one. Both of them should take you about 1 to 2 minutes to complete, but I will sit there and post the other one here in just a moment. But I did want to make sure we gave the feedback for Mr. Murphy on the one that he would want. Another question by Michael Ramos says, you mentioned something along the lines of you were better off going down the mechanical engineering path. What made you discover this?
Sure. So every university is going to have a slightly different program. So there were really 2 reasons for me to do that. And one of them was based off of how Cal Poly, at the time, it's changed now, had their biomedical engineering program set up. It was unaccredited at the time that I was going there. It was in the process of becoming accredited. But that was one issue. And alongside that, it was in its infancy, and they were still developing what it was going to be. And people really didn't understand what biomedical engineers could do coming out of Cal Poly. And because I was trying to do, all my internships were more geared towards mechanical engineering, doing CAD. They didn't really offer CAD for biomedical engineers when I was taking the class. They didn't offer heat transfer. They didn't offer fluid mechanics. A lot of things that I was really interested in because I was exposed to it on the job, and I wasn't really able to take it. So I wanted to pivot. I wanted to take more of those deep technical classes. If you go to a different school, maybe they'll already offer them. But I kind of alluded to it. But the other part was that people didn't really know what a biomedical engineer was coming out of Cal Poly. And people don't know what it is coming out of a lot of schools. It's becoming better understood, but because there's uncertainty, when you have someone that's a hiring manager that went to school 30 years ago that knew what a mechanical engineer was, but doesn't know what a biomedical engineer was or is, then they won't know where to put you in their mental box. They think, I need this person that's able to do X, Y, and Z. I know a mechanical engineer, no matter what school you go to, can do X, Y, and Z. Maybe this biomedical engineer can do Z, but they said something about A and M, but I have no idea. So I'm probably going to go with this other person. And that's the trouble that you might run into. It's an issue of brand recognition. But for me, it was also making sure that I learned what I wanted to learn. And every school is going to be different. So I'd encourage you to just make sure you're aware of what the offerings are for that program. Though again, you can always change your major. I changed it 3 times. So you shouldn't feel locked into it or pressured to pick the right thing right away. You'll learn along the way what it is that you want to do.
A kid who captures my heart, my son Kenny, is asking, since there has been testing for a few years in 3D printing of biological material for replacement organs, do you believe that in the future we would be able to have 3D printed heart valves?
Yes, and I think that that might take, and this is totally my speculation and opinion, that might take 2 different routes. One might be a printed polymer valve. If that technology can be worked out where you're able to customize a valve specifically for an individual that has a certain amount of tilt on their annular plane or whatever it is that they specifically need that's going to help with their hemodynamic flow a lot better. But the other route that's really cool and emerging is the 3D printing, and I think you referenced this, of biologic material, where you can develop what they call a scaffold. You print out the scaffold of what you want the valve to look like, and then you seed it with stem cells, and you put it in what's called it's basically just a chamber that allows for tissue to grow on it, and they treat it in such a way that it's going to have the right properties and it's exposed to stress, and it's basically a brand new heart valve that might already have your DNA in it, might not, depends on what route people go, and they take that and then they surgically implant that. Wow. That would be really cool, but yeah. That's a ways away.
Is there any, Ronald Encanto is asking, is there any human element in the modern robotic surgery?
Yeah, definitely. You need to still have a human driving the bus, as it were. You need to have somebody that is a fully trained physician. From what I understand, a lot of younger doctors tend to want to get into this little hub, and older doctors tend to prefer to have their hands on it because they may or may not trust the technology, though it has proven itself over several years now that it can be very reliable. But yeah, you definitely have the human element there. It can safeguard you against potential mistakes. You always hear about how steady a surgeon's hand is. Well, when it's using davinci or one of these other computer-assisted surgical devices, you have the ability that, well, there's an algorithm in there that if you accidentally slip, the computer will correct for that and prevent it from happening. There's like millisecond delays that protect you from potential error. So in addition to being able to go into these tight little spaces, there's also these amazing safety features that are worked into it.
Excellent. Various kids have asked about the salary scale for a biomedical engineer, like beginning pay to experienced pay. What is about the salary range?
It's pretty big. So if you go to a small company that's maybe in orthopedics, you could maybe expect, or a startup, or there's a number of different smaller companies that would maybe pay you in the $40,000 to $60,000 range starting off. But other engineers that have been around for a while, maybe if you are an engineer, you work your way up into the management track, you go into becoming a director or a VP. Those obviously have much higher rungs that will be up in the $200,000+ range. But as an engineer today, I would probably expect somewhere in the medical device space, somewhere between $40,000 and $180,000 within a 3-decade time frame. Yeah, it hops up pretty quickly early in your career in the first 5 to 10 years, and then it sort of slowly climbs the rest of your career unless you make specific moves into different industries or position yourself very well. But it's a big range, but that's the range.
Ravino Macadon is asking, for the cardio band system, would you need to replace them in a certain amount of time?
There isn't a lot of data on it, but what's interesting about the cardio band system is that typically we go into patients that are closer to the end, and then there's no real need to go in and replace it because they won't be able to, they will not outlast the cardio band. But also alongside Cardiobands, kind of fundamental concept is that when you go in and you drop these anchors in, there's no retrieving it. So there's no real replacing it. The only way to replace it would be to go in surgically and cut it out. But it's non-replaceable, though there are technologies that are being developed in a number of different companies that would allow you to drop another full valve replacement, similar to what Amy had talked about with the Sapien valve, but it's intended for different applications, different valves. You would be able to put that inside of a Cardioband potentially. That's something that's being explored. That's experimental. That's off-label. That's nothing that Edwards recommends, but it's something that has been tried out previously and might be something that is able to be done in the future.
Gotcha. All righty, guys. Before the last question, I'm about to post the survey, the Google form for our engineering department here at Cabrillo High School. So if you can please click on that link, and as Mr. Murphy is actually answering the last question, if you can please fill that out, we greatly appreciate it. Mr. Murphy, I will also sit there and give you a copy of those results and a copy of the questions so you know what we ask, and then give you those results. The final question is from Aubrey de Guzman. What do you think is the most important skill to have as a biomedical engineer?
Ooh, that's very interesting. I would start from where you would need to in your career. So typically when you first start off, you're not doing extremely detailed design work on an implant. Sometimes you do, most of the time you don't. Most of the time you're working on testing. So what goes into testing would be developing test fixtures, understanding the methodology that goes behind setting up a test that's reliable, that's not going to have false conclusions, just following the scientific method. And in conjunction with that, understanding statistics, even basic statistics, so that when you get data, you can interpret it and understand what it is that happened. If you set up a test and it's a test to break things at a certain force, and every value is far above the limit, but you see that those breakpoints are all over the place, statistically, you could have some failures. And that's not an in-control design. That's something that needs to be changed. So my recommendation to every engineer is that even though it's not something that you necessarily are going to have to do for the rest of your life, understanding at the beginning of your career how statistics are going to benefit you would probably be a really good thing to learn about, in addition to just general concepts in physics.
We do have more questions. I don't know if you have time to stay on. It is 4:01, ladies and gentlemen. So if you have something else to do, that is fine. If you wanted to see about getting your question answered, Mr. Murphy, do you have a few more minutes to be able to answer any other questions that are here?
Yeah, I got some
Perfect. So guys, I do want to thank you. And I want to thank you, Mr. Murphy, for your presentation. We will stay on for a few more minutes of extra time. If you're interested in staying on, feel free to do so. If you can please complete those two surveys, the Survey Monkey that's in the chat, but also the Google form that I have posted for both me and Mr. Murphy, we'd greatly appreciate that. So the next question comes out is by Jaira Kalo. Do you know what the job outlook is like for biomedical engineers?
So it a couple of years ago was one of the faster growing careers in engineering. I don't know exactly how it ranks today, but it's an evolving area that is going to continue to grow, though probably not as fast as software engineering is going to grow, but it's growing. I wish I had a better answer than that, but it's nowhere near stagnating.
I did go ahead and put www.bls.gov. It's the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, guys. If you're interested in looking up any type of career and what the growth expectation is or decline expectation is over the next 10 years, that website, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, can help you. Amanda is asking, do procedures run smoothly or do mistakes often happen? If there are mistakes, how would they recover from them? And I'm assuming she's referring to the heart valve replacement.
Okay, so I don't have the exact figures on everything, all of the different procedures, but I know mistakes do happen, though over time with all of our technologies, we're getting better and better at training our physicians, being there to give them direct feedback on what it is that they're doing, how they made a mistake, what can be done to correct it. If you are deploying, for example, the Sapien aortic valve, there is no way once it's deployed to be able to recover it. And in the same way, once you've dropped all of the anchors down for Cardioband, there's no way to recover it without having surgery. So we need to go through the effort of being very diligent when we train physicians for what it is that they're going to be doing. Otherwise, mistakes could be made, and then you have to convert to surgery. Though there are a lot of things that we design in and we put into the procedure that we ask physicians to do, and stop points, and we ask them to make sure that before they do something, that they're certain that that's what they want to do. There's a lot of discussion, especially with experimental technologies, as to what they might do next, or what they shouldn't do next.
Adrian Bayaris, I don't know if he's still on here, but I thought it was an interesting question. He says, do you gain inspirations from things like origami to produce these types of product? To figure out how to put a small object into a small device neatly and organized?
I know that, so for Cardioband specifically, nothing really gets folded, but
Okay.
for Sapien, yes, it gets folded, and there are other valves that Edwards has that need to be folded. And those specific ways in which they're folded and how they're crimped and how they're designed does take influence from different folding techniques that I would imagine at some point stemmed from origami or were influenced by that. But I can't bring up a specific example of that, just to say that, yes, like the way that things fold has to be extremely precise. So we look to inspiration where we can, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Excellent. Letty Patino is asking, I'm assuming you work in a team of engineers. What does that structure look like?
So we have a semi-traditional structure that you'll find in a lot of corporate environments, where it's me, two other engineers, and a technologist, which is someone that doesn't have an engineering degree. They run a lot of testing. They're really good at their job. Honestly, they could be probably an engineer, but they just didn't get the backing, or they just are happy doing what they're doing. And above us, we have a manager. Above him, we have a director. Higher, we have a vice president of R&D, and then you have a vice president of the organization, and then a vice president or a president, CEO of the company. So it's very hierarchical. I've got other friends that work at engineering firms where it's really flat. I think that that's emerging as a more common practice. I'm not sure Edwards will get there in the near future, but his structure is more like everybody's kind of equal. They rely on each other. You've got like project leads, but as far as direct management goes, you don't have that kind of boss-employee relationship. You're all more so equals.
All right. Ricardo Lopez is asking, will prosthetic limbs ever reach an advanced point where they can exactly replicate a real arm?
That's really interesting. I think it will happen. It really depends on how we're able to neurally integrate with mechanisms. Like you have what Musk is working on, Neuralink. Depending on how successful that is, or those similar technologies, you might get a very quick jump from using prosthetics where it uses little like pulleys and whatnot on your body, so that when you turn your body, it grabs things, to having full dexterity of this mechanical robotic arm. That could happen very quickly, but in parallel to that are advancements to replace the missing valve with a biologic, replace the damaged or missing limb with a biologic limb, regrowing it with stem cells. It's really just sort of a race there between the two concepts, and it depends on where advancements happen. But sooner or later, one of those will happen, maybe both.
I know that we took some students, actually. We had the luxury of taking them down to UC Irvine last year for the National Academy of Engineering, a national meeting. And they actually had a presenter there that they're working on the beginnings of the neurological paths that they can insert a prosthetic, insert the wires into the brain. And from that person thinking can actually, as of now, they were only able to like extend like a stick out. But it was pretty fascinating. A lot of the students actually quite enjoyed that. And so I would think with that kind of development, it would be something in which is probably in the near future, in my opinion. Let's see here. If there's any more here, let's see. Letty, I'm assuming you work a team of engineers. Job outlook, we already talked about that. Amanda's asking, do procedures run smooth? Oh no, I already asked that one. What does the interview process look like when applying for a job as a mechanical engineer? That's an excellent question.
So typically, if you are applying out of school, then you're going to a career fair or you're contacting companies online. The best way to go about it is going to the career fair. You meet these representatives of the company. Sometimes they're HR, sometimes they're other engineers, sometimes they're just other folks that work at the company. And you talk to them, you try to get a real interview with them. So you got this huge line of people, you go up, you spend like 30 seconds talking to this person, they look at your resume, and then they select you for a follow-up interview or not. And if you get selected, you come back, they give you the interview, and then they'll pass that on to a hiring manager, where someone at the company that needs somebody is going to have a list of resumes that are recommended by this first group, and they're going to call these people, they're going to look through their resumes, and they're going to decide who they want to hire. Some companies have different processes. That's the traditional one. The one that I went through was a little bit different. You go through that same process, but instead of being selected by that hiring manager, you're selected by the executive leadership at the company. And you, along with 30 other people, go through these activities where it's like how you work with other people. They're watching you build bridges. They're watching you out of toothpicks. They're watching you try to make a little boat that holds an egg. They're watching you do one of those parachute drop with an egg competitions. And they see how collaborative you are, how creative you are. And then they'll extend a blanket job offer to you potentially. And then you get funneled into a specific path. And then a hiring manager might look at you, or their boss's boss might just say, you have to hire this person. There's a bunch of different ways that it goes. The traditional one is the process that I talked about before, where you go to the job fair. But also, if you graduate without having a job offer firmly in hand, you can always continue to apply online, or you might work as a contractor. You might work as a freelancer, build up a skill set, and then apply. There's so many different avenues you can take. But yeah, job fair is the most traditional.
Excellent. All right, guys, are there any other questions? You have a lot of positive comments about, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I really learned a lot. Amazing presentation. Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. This was the most interesting and informative presentation so far, as what a few of the kids have said. So, Mr. Murphy, I do thank you so very much for taking the time. Aubrey de Guzman just says, thank you for taking the time to inform us regarding this career. I really enjoyed it. So, Mr. Murphy, thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I look forward to you guys coming back to us in 2 weeks. We will be having a fifth presentation by Dr. Nicole Naveau, who will be talking to us about particle accelerators that she works with as a PhD physicist at the SLAC laboratory, which I believe is located in Georgia. So we're going to be having that on February 5th at 3 p.m. We look forward to all of you being there. Guys, take care. Have a wonderful weekend, and be good. Stay healthy. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Erica.